Greetings and love to all of you. My name is Brother Ishtananda, and welcome to our 2021 convocation. Our class is on introspection, exploring the workings of your inner self. And when I first saw that assigned topic, I thought, but there are two inner selves. There's the psychological, egoic self with its ever-changing mental landscape, and there's the transcendental calmness of our true self, pure consciousness that we are. I went online to find out what the common understanding of introspection is. And the first thing I saw was a short paragraph from Wikipedia. And I'd like to read you just one sentence from that. In psychology, the process of introspection relies on the observation of one's mental state, while in spiritual context, it may refer to the examination of one's soul. So both types of introspection are important on the spiritual path. I'd like to begin by talking a little about the psychological introspection. In order to recognize our true nature, we need to become happy, well-adjusted individuals. Otherwise, the restless thoughts, the negative emotions, they create such commotion inside that we're not able to perceive that pure, transcendental, calm, joyous consciousness that we are. Psychological introspection is basically asking ourselves, introspective questions. Like, how did I behave today? How did I treat others? Where was my consciousness? What kind of thoughts did I have? So basically it's asking ourselves, how did I do? And it's helpful when we're introspecting to have something specific to do. Otherwise it's too easy for the ego to say, well, I did pretty good today. So some people use charts and they check off the boxes. Others use graphs so they can plot how they're doing. Others use journaling. So come up with what is right for you. But the important thing is to do it, to make introspection a very vital part of your spiritual routine. There is one thing I would caution about when we're introspecting, and that is focusing too much on the negative. Yes, we do need to see it, but once we've seen it and determined we want to change that, then we should follow Master's recommendation and focus on the positive, good quality. So let's say that we're introspecting and find that we become angry easily. We need to decide what we would consider the opposite of anger is. And let's say we decided it's peace. So we forget about the anger, and our whole focus now becomes cultivating peace. We read about what Master says about it in the teachings. We put up reminders to ourselves to remain calm. We surround ourselves with imagery that is calming to us. We put ourselves in peaceful environments like in nature. So the principle is, again, don't focus on the negative once we've seen it and determined to change it, but to shift that focus, put the concentration on that opposite good quality. As we introspect, it's vital that we are compassionate with ourselves, because when we look, we will see things that need changing. But we have to remember, we should love ourselves, not in an egotistical way, but because we're children of God, because we are pure divine consciousness. So psychological introspection is very important on the spiritual path. If you think about the foundation of yoga is the yama niyamas, the moral codes, the do's and the don'ts. And in fact, one of the niyamas is self-study. And so how are we going to know if we're accomplishing this foundation, building this foundation of our spiritual life if we're not introspecting? However, as important as the psychological introspection is, we have to go further. And this is where the spiritual introspection and meditation comes in. So today I'd like to focus mainly on the spiritual introspection. For those interested in introspection, I would highly recommend God Talks with Arjuna, Master's Commentary on the first verse of the first chapter. Tremendous amount of information there. But while the psychological introspection deals with observing this ever-changing mental landscape, the spiritual introspection always points us back toward our true self. And after the talk, we'll have a guided meditation which will help us to recognize this pure divine consciousness, this pure awareness that we are. For most of us, in shifting this identification from ego to the soul, the pure awareness that we are, it's going to be a very gradual process. And I like to think of it as if you have a very bright, pure light, and then you put filters in front of it, some of one color, some of another color. You stack these filters in front of it until the light that's coming out at the end is very dim and it's very tainted. So to see things purely, clearly, we need to start removing those filters. And the pure light at the source is always there. And the more filters we remove, the brighter that light becomes, until eventually, when the last filter is removed, we see everything clearly as it is. So we are that bright light, so to speak, of awareness. Now, until we become fully realized, recognizing, being established in that divine consciousness that we are, there will always be some filters there. There will always be some egoic involvement. But the more and more we use the spiritual introspection to point us back to our true self, the less and less those filters will influence our perception. Now, having stressed the importance of the spiritual introspection, I'm in no way suggesting that you give up the psychological introspection or even psychological counseling if you really need that. So I'm not suggesting to give up the psychological, but just stressing that by using the spiritual introspection, it's pointing us back. It's working at the root of the problem, which is this identification with the ego, the mind, the body, the world, instead of identification with our real self. But we may ask, what is spiritual introspection? And possibly the epitome of this is what Master refers to as the great inquiry. And this comes from the autobiography of a yogi when he's recounting his meeting with Ramana Maharishi. And I'd just like to read something from this section. Master said, "To help humanity regain its forgotten state of perfection, Sri Ramana teaches that one should continually ask himself, who am I? The great inquiry indeed. Then Master goes on to say, by stern rejection of all other thoughts, the devotee soon finds himself going deeper and deeper into the true self. So what does Master mean there when he says stern rejection of all other thoughts? If you ask the average person, who are you? Or let's say the average person asks himself, who am I? The first response would normally be their name. I'm Joe Grow. But then we realize they're more than the name. And so it may be, I'm a husband, I'm a father. But they realize they haven't always been a husband and a father. So it may be, well, I'm a man. But then there's recognition that I'm something far more than a body with a gender. And it may be I'm these thoughts, these feelings. Whose thoughts and feelings? So you get the picture. You keep stepping back. The inquiry keeps taking us. We keep rejecting the, quote, wrong thoughts. And as Master said, then that's taking us deeper and deeper into our true self. It's always pointing us back. This stern rejection of all other thoughts of who we are. This is at the heart of the spiritual introspection, because it's not accepting the identification with all the changings that are going on. This is why Master puts it that it's putting you deeper and deeper into your true self. But even during the day, we can direct that attention back to the true self. We don't have to set aside time for the spiritual introspection or the stillness of meditation, even during the day. Let's say some unpleasant situation comes up. You can affirm, this has nothing to do with me. And you think, but he just said this. Obviously, he said it to me. It has something to do with me. But no, not really. Not you, the real self. Not you, the soul. Not you, the Atman. So every circumstance we can use to point to our true self, our real nature. If we're sincere in this spiritual introspection, it can be a tremendous help to our meditations. Because what it does, it helps us to recognize that what we are in the stillness of meditation. So they help each other. The spiritual introspection really helps our meditation, and conversely, meditation helps us that with the spiritual introspection. We begin to recognize more and more that still divine consciousness that we are. Spiritual introspection sounds like something that most of us on the spiritual path would be interested in doing. However, there is one very necessary ingredient for the spiritual introspection to work. And that ingredient is sincerity. We have to be absolutely sincere with ourselves that we want to let go of the ego. We want to recognize, become identified with that pure divine consciousness that we are. And let me explain a little more of what I mean here, because this is based not only on my experience, but also in talking with devotees for many years. Once we decide that we really want to let go of the ego and not work on just the psychological level, but to really go deep into our true self. We have to accept the fact that the whole purpose of our spiritual life is letting go of that ego consciousness. And as I mentioned, some of us say we want to do this, but how sincere are we about it? I'd like to share with you a story from the Mahabharata. And it's during the war of Kurukshetra, where this tremendous battle is taking place. It's a great analogy for that battle that is taking place within us between our lower and our higher nature. And we know from Master's commentary of the Bhagavad Gita that Krishna represents the guru or spirit, and Arjuna represents the disciple, and Bhishma represents the ego. Now, Arjuna was a great archer, and the war had been going on for some days, and Krishna told Arjuna, "You have to kill Bhishma." So Arjuna shot the banner off of Bhishma's chariot. He shot arrows by Bhishma's ear. He shot the bow out of Bhishma's hand. Krishna, in exasperation, said, "You're not trying to kill him. You're just putting on an archery exhibition." He said, "If you don't kill him, I will." Now, Krishna had vowed that he wouldn't fight, that he would only drive Arjuna's chariot. And when he threatens to break his vow, Arjuna realizes how serious this is. And so at that point, he became earnest about killing Bhishma. And eventually he did, shot him full of so many arrows it said he was laying on a bed of arrows. So think about, after the Guru has told us we really need to kill or get rid of the ego, are we just putting on an archery exhibition by doing spiritual things? Or are we recognizing that all of these spiritual things we're doing are really intended to kill the ego? It's like someone said, techniques that were given for ego transcendence can become techniques for ego enhancement. So we have to be sure why we're using these techniques. We have to be sure why we're doing the things on the spiritual path that we do. The story is a great allegory between this killing of the lower nature, so to speak, but obviously no killing takes place. Because if you think about what the ego is simply the divine consciousness of the soul that has become identified with the body and the mind. And Master actually said, your higher self only purifies the lower self. It does not destroy it. Your higher self only purifies the lower self. It does not destroy it. I always like the way Sri Dayamata used to express this, and let the ego hang loosely about the soul. Let the ego hang loosely about the soul. So there may be some ego identification for a long time, but let it hang loosely about. That is, become more identified with that pure consciousness we are. And yes, the personal self will still be there to some extent, but let it hang loosely. Some may not want to let go, give up the ego because they think, well, I would lose my relationships. I would become apathetic. I wouldn't do anything. But really it's just the opposite. The relationships become deeper because there is much less ego involved. There is much less wanting to get from the relationship instead of wanting to give to the relationship. And as far as doing things, when we don't have the cross currents of our personal desires and agendas, much, much more can get done. Much more can get done in a much greater way. So we shouldn't feel by letting the ego hang loosely, so to speak, that we'll be giving up anything. There's an old Zen saying that before enlightenment, chopping wood and carrying water. After enlightenment, chopping wood and carrying water. Meaning, the outer circumstances don't necessarily change. What changes is our perception, our appreciation of those situations. If you think about those who have let go of the ego, Krishna, Christ, Buddha, Paramahansa Yogananda, look at what they've done for the world. And yet it was without that strong egoic attachment of I'm doing this. And I've talked to some people who say that they want to let go of the ego, and that's why they want to be a spiritual person. And when devotees tell me that, I tell them, but the goal of the spiritual life is not to become a spiritual person. The goal of the spiritual life is to not be a person. Meaning that even the spiritual person still is thinking about I and me and my identity, how much I meditate, my involvement at the temple, my position in this. So there's still that strong sense of I-ness. So even this spiritual person concept has to be held very loosely or let go of. In regards to this, to try and help us see this more clearly as to why even the spiritual identity has to be let go of, I'd like to talk just a little bit about 3 attributes that are just inherent in creation. And they are the influences for all of our thoughts and actions. And in India, these 3 attributes would be called the gunas. And there's a sattva guna, which is positive, and it influences for good, for upliftment, for spirituality. And then there's the tamas guna, which is a negative attribute, and it influences toward inertia, ignorance. And then there's the rajas guna, which is neutral. It's the activating guna. So it can activate spiritual qualities, it can activate degrading qualities. It's just it's neutral. It's an activating power. So I'd like to tell a short story about a devotee in India who had gone on a long pilgrimage, and he was on his way back home. And as he was going through a forest, he was accosted by these 3 bandits. And the first bandit said, "Let's kill him." The second bandit said, "No, let's just tie him up and leave him here in the forest." And so that's what they did. They tied him up, left him there in the forest. Well, after some time, the third bandit came back and untied him and said, "If you will follow me, I'll lead you out of the forest." And so, as they walked along, the Pilgrim began to like this bandit. He was very helpful. And eventually they stopped, and the bandit said, "Now, if you'll take that path over there, it'll lead you back to your village, and you'll be home." And the pilgrim, now really liking this third bandit, said, "Why don't you come home with me and live in my village?" And the bandit said, "No, I'm a bandit. My home is here in the forest." So the pilgrim is the devotee who is traveling from one spiritual practice to another. The first bandit is the tamasic guna. It wants to just kill the devotee's aspirations through inertia and ignorance. The second bandit is the rajas guna. And it wants to just tie up the devotee with ceaseless activity and leave him in the forest of delusion. The third bandit is the sattvic guna, which leads us toward our home, beyond the forest of duality, so to speak. So I just wanted to share this. If we're going to get out of this forest of duality and delusion, yes, we have to follow the sattvic guna. But there comes a time where even that has to be left behind. Master said the soul must dissolve all sense of identification with duality, both the good and bad conditions. Mrinalini Mata said, "We're made in His image, and within us is the capacity to anchor ourselves in a reality higher than the troubling drama of duality, to be free as God is free, to unite with His consciousness, love, and joy. To discover that truth is the purpose of our lives and the ultimate solution to the suffering and inharmony in the world. To discover that truth is the purpose of our lives and the ultimate solution to the suffering and inharmony in the world." So the choice is ours. Do we want to go home to that higher reality, or do we want to remain in that forest of delusive duality? If we're not willing to let go of that ego, even that spiritual person ego, we're always going to experience things that are not to our liking. Because creation is constantly changing. These three gunas are constantly at work. We've all heard the expression, "these uncertain times." Well, all times are uncertain. As someone said, the only constant is change. The only constant is change. However, Lord Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita said, "Become anchored in that which is changeless." Become anchored in that which is changeless. There's only one thing that is changeless, and that's the awareness of all the change. The awareness is always there. This aware presence, this changeless aware presence, is what we really are. And I heard once in an analogy, which I thought was very good at pointing this out. Let's say that we have a large sheet of white paper. And the paper represents God, absolute reality, pure consciousness, whatever you want to call it. Actually, Master said, God is absolute existence. God is ever new joy. This joy is omnipresent. Feel your oneness with that joy. It resides within you. So we have this white paper, And we take a pencil and we draw a very strong, dark line of a circle. This circle represents I, me. I've just separated me from the rest of this white paper. What's inside that circle? White paper. What's underneath the line? White paper. But we get so focused on the line that that's all we see, and we ignore the white paper that we truly are. But let's say we took an eraser and we went over that line and it lightened up. It's not as dense as it was. And then we take the eraser and we completely erase parts of the line so that the line creating the circle is a broken line. So now, because the density is less, you can see some of the white paper underneath the line. There are areas where the white paper inside the line and outside the line run together. So the white paper we said is God, reality, pure existence. The line is our ego consciousness that we focus on so much. What is the eraser? What is the eraser? What is lightening that line? What is breaking up that line so that the white is no longer obscured, separated? The eraser is meditation, spiritual introspection, living a spiritual life. All of these are helping us to recognize that true nature we are, a part of that God consciousness. And if we're clear on this concept, that this is why we're following a spiritual path, this is why we're meditating, introspecting, living the spiritual life, if we're clear on that concept, then that line will become fainter and fainter. But those things have to be done with the understanding of why we're doing them. Otherwise, the eraser doesn't work. We can go through the motions. The density of the line will remain the same if that understanding is not there. The great German mystic Meister Eckhart once said, "If you don't first get rid of yourself, you will meet one obstacle after another wherever you go." If you don't first get rid of yourself, you will meet one obstacle after another wherever you go. When I read that, it reminded me of my favorite quote from Sri Mrinalini Mata. I've quoted it again and again over the years. She said, "If you go down to the basis of the spiritual life and what you learn, what you gather from the Guru is only one thing: giving up that I, giving up that ego self." The basis of the spiritual life, giving up that I, giving up that ego self. And Master would often quote from the Indian scriptures, "When this I shall die, then will I know who am I." If spiritual introspection points us toward our true self, are there techniques or practices that help us to recognize it, that puts us in its presence? And of course there are. And the interesting thing is, many of these practices have a common factor, and that is the breath. And the reason for this is there's an intimate relationship between the breath and the mind. And very basically put, the more restless the breath, the more restless the mind. The calmer the breath, the calmer the mind. So this is why Master said, "When the thoughts have gone to rest, that's the time I see him best." So it's important that we use these techniques to get us behind the mind. One of the great and very direct ways of getting behind the mind is the Hong Sau technique. Even the meaning of the mantra itself points us toward our true being. The meaning of the mantra, I am He, meaning I am spirit. And Sri Dayamata, she used to praise the effectiveness of this technique so often. And one of the main purposes of the technique is to naturally lengthen the pause between the inhalation and the exhalations. And as we do this, we become calmer and calmer until there's a point where we no longer feel a need to breathe for a period of time. And this is the results of patient practice of this technique. And this is why the slow breathing and breathlessness created by the Kriya Yoga technique is so important. In that after Kriya state, there is that recognition of our true self, of the soul, the Atman. One devotee mentioned to me that early in his spiritual journey, he became aware of inquiry or spiritual introspection, asking, who am I? And he said, but it was only after years of practicing Kriya that became really meaningful to him. So there are other techniques in the SRF lessons that help us to calm the breath and hence the mind. And after this talk, we'll have a meditation and we'll practice some techniques. And in that meditation, we will actually experience that we are this pure, calm consciousness behind the mind. Let me share with you some words from one who had fully realized this changeless nature of their true being. And this is from the Autobiography of a Yogi, where Master is meeting with Anandamayi Ma. And he had asked her to tell him something of his life. And she declined. It's just like one insignificant incarnation wasn't worth talking about. But Master repeated his request. And so, addressing him as Father, she said, Father, there's little to tell. My consciousness has never associated itself with this temporary body. Before I came on this earth, Father, I was the same. As a little girl, I was the same. I grew into womanhood. Still, I was the same. When the family in which I had been born made arrangements to have this body married, I was the same. And Father, in front of you now, I am the same. Ever afterward, though the dance of creation change around me in the hall of eternity, I shall be the same. This is one who had completely erased the line. There's only the sameness, the changelessness of the white paper. You may ask, but how practical is recognizing our real self? What practical application is there? What does it do for the world? And it does tremendous things for the world. If you think about whomever we're dealing with, whatever situations we're dealing with, if we're coming from a very clear, open perspective of our true self, we're bringing harmony, clarity to that situation, instead of addressing the situation, viewing it through those dark filters of the ego self. The more we recognize and establish ourselves in that true divine nature, the more thoughtful we'll be of others, the more we'll want to help others, the more we'll reach out to others, the more harmony we'll be bringing to the world. We're not able to bring love, light, peace, joy to the world when we're strongly identified with that ego self. So when we ask, how practical is it? What would I be doing for the world by recognizing my true nature? As I say, we'll be doing a tremendous benefit to the world. We'll always be coming from that place of love and concern, bringing harmony to those situations. The title of this talk was Introspection, Exploring the Workings of Your Inner Self. And the real exploration is when we are letting go of these egoic filters. This is the real exploration. Then we're going deeper and deeper into our true self. It's about letting go of filter after filter and going deeper and deeper into the pure consciousness that we are. I remember some years ago seeing a poster, and it really caught my eye. It was an old sailing ship sailing out on the ocean at night. And the caption read, "Ships are safe in the harbor, but that's not what ships are made for." And our ego consciousness tries to keep us in that tiny harbor of identification with the body, the mind, the world. That confined consciousness, being in that little harbor, gives the ego some sense of safety, of preserving its own existence. But that's not who we are. We are pure consciousness. We are formless. We are limitless. We are this untethered consciousness. And I would encourage us all to leave that tiny, confining consciousness and explore our real nature. Explore our true being. Master tells us we're Sat Chit Ananda. We're ever existing, ever conscious, ever new joy. And the more we live our lives from that place of our real existence, the more we will effortlessly manifest those divine qualities, bringing that peace, that love, that harmony, that sense of caring and understanding to not only ourselves, those around us, but to the world. After this talk, we'll be having a guided meditation which will help us to recognize that pure consciousness that we are. May God bless us all, and I'm wishing you all success in your exploration of your true self.